That was not meant to be a gavel. It was accidentally. She's got the gavel for this meeting.
I said, I have the all powerful. Makes me nervous.
Okay, one more minute, but we've got audience. And, was that Sunshine telling us it's hard to hear?
No, she's wondering about comments being.
Your general public comments for the beginning.
Yeah, we're gonna do these at the end, because what we want is, I think for these meetings, it'll be once people hear what we've got and what's being said, that they can opine about it or bring. Can we have one at the beginning and at the end? Well, we want to make sure we actually have time for the committee to do its work. I hear that request, and I understand why it makes some sense, but we'll see how it goes.
Hello, Joe, how are you doing? Megan? What's going on?
What should be going on? I got nothing happening.
There it is. We'll call the meeting to order. My name is Cheryl Twombly, and I am on the board and was asked to chair this committee. So this is our first steering committee meeting of the Children's Trust. We'll do a roll call. Here.
Here. Member Snyder. Peterson.
Here.
Member Brown.
Here.
Just to clarify, we're meeting only with the board members in the committee this time, simply because it's so that we can really give our hopeful consultant to be enough information for her to propose a scope of work to the board. So this is the kickoff for the board process, and then we'll have an actual first organizational meeting once we have our consultant nailed down.
And did everybody have a chance to look at the agenda? Our big agenda. Have a motion to approve the agenda?
So,
Okay, all in favor?
all right.
No nays, so all is unanimous. Okay, discussion items. And Catherine, I'm going to turn that over to you, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you again, virtually this time. One point before I begin, I am having, there's a little bit of echo, I think, from those high ceilings in that lovely room. So I have been told you can hear me clearly. I may occasionally need to ask you to repeat yourselves because there is a little bit of garbling. So please bear with me if I have to ask you to repeat. So I've been charged with creating a draft proposal of planning activities and timeline for your consideration to allow the steering committee and the board to meet the strategic planning charge as outlined. So in order to do that, I have a couple of questions for you to give me some input so that I can then come back to you very quickly, because I know, time is of the essence, with a proposal for your consideration. So my first question for you is really, what have you found helpful in past strategic planning processes? What do you want to make sure that we are doing? I know we've already talked about the community listening process, so I do want to talk about that a little bit more. But in addition to that, what do you want to make sure that you are engaging in as a steering committee or a board during this planning process?
What we're looking for is to, in a nutshell, find out what we should be focusing in on as far as for children and what the board feels are priorities. And based upon that, that will be how we focus our decisions.
Okay, so about the funding priorities and the theory of change and the things that I see that are listed in the charge to the steering committee. Is there anything that you all have found particularly helpful or not helpful in past planning processes that you want to make sure we either include or avoid?
Well, not helpful have been processes where at the end you don't have clear, actionable, and measurable things that you can track. I've seen a lot of strategic plans that end up on a shelf because there's nothing reportable, trackable about them. So I think, to me, it has to be something that we can hold ourselves accountable to. I think our prior approach to priorities for funding was data-driven, but not community-informed. And I think key for me in this process is that we, yes, have the data. And I think we need to update the data because COVID, I think, would have impacted a number of the things that we were measuring. And I don't know that those will be I don't know that new things will be identified, but what I don't think we did the last time is have sufficient community input to know what might best drive the change in those outcomes. So to me, that's really important, that we understand what our theory of change is, but what's the community's theory of change about us, and how do we merge those to come up with something actionable.
Right, whatever we learn from the listening project specifically, we need to know what we're going to do with it. How do we move forward, and how do we move it forward in a way that the community is receptive and they, we are listening to what they are telling us they need, and then it will impact the indicators that we're looking at right now.
Okay.
I think that was something we did with the Services Council before, is that we had a huge, in fact, I went and pulled it and printed it, but we did a huge a community assessment that another agency did for us. And from that is how we even decided how we wanted to move forward. We didn't start making decisions until we had, have that assessment done, and we kind of looked at the key indicators and what we might do to impact them.
Okay, good. Anyone else on thoughts about helpful or not helpful? Ken?
Yeah, so a common theme, community buy-in.
Okay.
What I thought was really helpful with regards to where we are is this acronym of HES, Health, Education, Support, Safety. And it would be great to have a community buy-in strategic plan, kind of North Star for each one of those four. For example, education, everyone can read by third grade. That is easy to articulate and the community is bought into that North Star.
Good, thank you. That's helpful. Any other, I have more questions, but before I move on, any other top of mind things in terms of what's helpful or not helpful during the process that you want me to know about? Okay. I know the steering committee is going to be doing, along with your consultants, the kind of the heavy lifting and drafting for full board consideration and the plan. One of the questions that I've been thinking about is how often you want to pull the full board together. One option is the full board is not pulled on this topic until there's a draft plan. I think it would be more useful to have the full board pulled together potentially after the community listening is done. So the full board gets the results of those, and in a full board session workshop does some work around interpreting and thinking about the implications of those for the plan. And then at a minimum, I'm thinking 2, and then when there is a draft plan pulled together. So I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on how frequently the full board is pulled together on this process.
Should we ask you once a meeting?
I think that.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion would be that as we kind of begin to draft up what we interpret what we heard, that we bring that before the board to just kind of let them know this is what we heard and this is the direction we're going.
Yeah.
And see if they can add anything to that, or if we're way off, they can redirect us. And then, but I think that would be enough.
Yeah, so my thought had been, since we're now gonna do 2 meetings a month, that on meeting 1, the data committee updates us on their progress, meeting 2, Cheryl updates us on this committee's process.
Like a verbal.
A verbal update, and then I think what Catherine is pointing to, which makes sense to me, is a workshop meeting, to really just dive into what we heard in the community, and then another one to dive into what the structure of the final plan is looking like, so that we're not just limited to, for 15 minutes or so, that any one agenda item is going to take up at the big board meeting.
That's fine. I think we need more than that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I figured we do updates periodically to the board as things were progressing. But I think
So-
that idea would be good.
One can update.
And the update, just where are we in the process, Catherine? Not a report, not anything written, but just Cheryl saying, hey, we've met, these are the
Right.
kinds of issues we're looking at. Just a general overview of what's happened. And of course, they'll also have access to minutes to these
Correct.
meetings too. So board members will be able to see what's been done and have any input they want. And certainly any board member can participate either virtually or come. We limited the membership just so that we wouldn't be rehashing the same thing meeting after meeting, because, yeah.
I agree. When I do strategic planning, now I almost always work with a steering committee that does some of the heavy lifting. It's just a more efficient process. So it's very smart to go that direction. Okay, so what I'm hearing, just to make sure I heard correctly, we're thinking about 2 full board workshops, but then kind of monthly updates so that they're appraised of progress. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, and no decisions are being made right now. You're just giving me information so I can put something back for you to consider. And does everyone have in front of them this strategic planning steering committee charge? Do you have that document?
Yes.
Okay, so my understanding, I'm looking at the charge, number 2, the questions, those questions A through F, that the steering committee is going to take a first stab at those questions, correct? Okay, good. Let's see, I think, and then the other thing that I've done, and I will share with the steering committee later, I've been looking at the other children's services councils and pulling down their strategic plans, because I find it's always helpful to, see what your peers are doing, and we can make those available. And I'll also look through those and see if there's anything there worthy to include in this proposed outline that I'm sending to you. So that brings me to a little bit thinking about time. One other, have you all discussed yet the frequency at which the steering committee would like to meet?
We haven't yet.
Okay. So some thinking on this, this community listening process is really one of 2 first steps. The other is updating the secondary data, the existing data, and I believe Bonnie is already working on that. So the community listening, so I think the strategic planning really cannot get very far ahead of the community listening process, because that is what's going to be something informing the plan. So a question I have is where you all are in terms of the community listening project, a process, who is developing the scope for that?
My thought was that this committee would do that.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
it's part of what is it we really need to know to answer these questions. So that would be, for me, something this committee would
Okay.
propose, bring back to the board for approval, because we'd have to approve any contracts related to that.
Okay, because that to me is the first and kind of most urgent work then of the committee, would be to get that scope developed and out, because I have a feeling, I don't know how quick your contracting processes are, but I have a feeling that may take a little bit of time. And I believe you're going to be looking for a local firm or consultant to spearhead that effort.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is that we have to do that before we really get going on work.
Right.
And I think that's a 3-month process minimum.
Yeah, this is,
Yeah.
that's why we're thinking about at the retreat and then approving at the board. This next funding cycle is really more of a continuation funding cycle, so that we give ourselves time to reassess and listen and do this, because I agree. And I think we could get a contract pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I
But
know
we
we
need
should-
to develop the scope and then put it out to bid. And for me, the listening piece has two components to it. One is who is really the best able to facilitate a listening process, but then how do we include key people in our various communities and populations, like special needs populations that we really haven't done a lot with. To make sure that the right people come. We can say we're convening, but if you have someone in the community who's your partner in that convening, you're better off. And I think it's not one community. I think in Alachua County, we've got lots of communities and lots of populations that we're going to need to engage in. Who can bring who to the table to make sure that we get as broad an audience and a participant group as we can.
And I think we have to offer it in different formats, because some people virtual will be the only way they'll come, or can come around their own schedule. So
Surveys will be one way to
right, so we'll have to figure out, how to offer that in different venues.
So we need somebody who knows how to organize that kind of thing, but then we also need to get people who can bring the right conveners to work with them in different locations and communities and methods.
County had a list, I know we went out for one of the referendums, we had a list of
The
who.
Dorothy's,
The Dorothy's, I'm sure.
over the Dorothy's. Yeah, I mean, we went out and talked about it at each of our joint meetings.
Right.
And then we had a joint meeting with the school board, joint meeting with the city. And I think we brought up the line.
So I think that we can get that information. I just think it's got to be part of the scope.
Yeah, so it seems to me like what we need to be spending our time doing in the next couple of months is really developing, and getting out the RFP for the consultant for the listening process.
Yep, which is why I hadn't said how often this committee should meet. I figured you guys needed to decide that.
How quick can you put together an RFP?
I was just sitting here thinking I can send out some fillers to see what, because our newest CSC in Leon County is doing the exact same thing, so we probably have a scope that we can use and try and get out.
Steal shamelessly.
No, literally,
We don't want to recreate it.
No, absolutely. not.
absolutely no need to recreate the wheel.
No.
Smart idea. Yeah, that's the planning piece isn't going to be starting for 3 or 4 months because the listening piece has really got to happen first, I think.
What about a role? We did something to get a facilitator for the last strategic plan. So there should be some information on that.
We really didn't. No, the last plan we did was really just the technical assistance committee, advisory, whatever we were called. And it was just a group of us. We didn't go out and do any kind of research kinds of stuff. I think the Dorothy's might have, but.
Well, we had a facilitator for the last. We went through that.
Oh, you're talking, yeah, I remember who you're talking about. She's, yeah, the woman who was the trade association,
So we just got somebody found a name that Colin knew.
no, she was the person who's running the Children's Services Council up in Tallahassee.
Okay.
Oh, Michelle.
That's right.
She came and just facilitated our conversation around developing mission and vision, that kind of thing. But not really a strategic plan in terms of funding priorities and theory of change or any of the things that we really, I think are going to be fundamental to this one is what do we think makes us have an impact?
I like in the Manatee plan, Christy shared a couple of plans with me. And therefore, the questions they ask before they fund each time are what are we buying? What are the chances that result will be achieved? And given other ways we could spend the money to achieve the same human gain, is this the best possible use of our resources? And I like how methodical they are.
It's simple and methodical.
Yeah, it was very simple. It's very plain. And I think we get sometimes lost in the weeds and a lot of times we get lost in the weeds. So, I mean, I think we've got to be very responsible what the community's wanting. But we also have to, you know, really be focused because we've got a limit, you know, we've got this X amount of dollars to spend. And how do we get the best impact for it? And the impact that the community wants. So I think that's key.
And I think that one of the things that, you know, we've sort of said it at board meetings, which is there's a limited amount of money. And we know it's not nearly enough to meet all of the needs that are out there. But we have to figure out a methodology for allocating. If we're going to come up with 4 areas, I like the, you know, the health, education, safety, support, all of that. We've got to come up with a way of allocating to each of those pots so that not everything ends up in one basket, which I think right now we're heavy on one side, neglecting a lot of other things. So I'm hoping that as we develop a theory of change of how do we have the broadest and deepest impact, we're going to have to translate that into a funding methodology that says how we're going to allocate. And that's kind of those questions are going to help with that.
So just listening to the latest fire.
Right.
There's
We've
always a
got to
fire.
quit putting out fires.
There's a lot of fires.
And I think because we've not been as clear as we could have in our direction sometimes that, you know, I think what we're doing now will refine it so much better. And then once we have this in place, it's going to change the way that people look at the way we're funding, that it won't feel so loose and, you know,
Sometimes haphazard.
yes, sometimes very haphazard. I mean, and when you talk about the listening project, because I do think we get some really good information from our providers as well. Would it be kind of a 2-part thing where providers had a venue where we were listening to them and then also the people?
Yeah, that's one of the constituencies that we have to.
Right. I just want to make sure that we make sure the providers voice. It may be a different set of questions or it may be the exact same questions, but I
Yes,
think we have to look at where it layers.
If you recall, in our February board workshop, we, the full board provided input into the topics and also the participants in the community listening process, and providers certainly was one of those categories. So I think I have what I need right now to prepare for you all a proposed strategic planning process outline, which doesn't include the community listening piece, because that is something that you all are working with with staff on putting that together. So I have what I need to be able to come back to you with a proposal for your consideration.
I think, Catherine, we would though, once we have that listening piece set up, drafted, we would like your input.
Yes.
And then, to have you kind of overarchingly help facilitate that whole process and make sure that it fits in the right spot, in the right direction.
Yes, and there may be some questions strictly from a strategic planning standpoint that I would want to be included. So absolutely.
Okay.
And I have experience doing that kind of work, here in Miami-Dade, conducting community listening, but I think it's very important that you have a local organization engaged with that. So certainly I would be happy to give my input even into the scope that's being developed.
Great.
So I'm going to toss it back to Cheryl. If there's any other business for the committee, I definitely have, I think what I need at this point to put something together for you.
Thank you so much. The only thing we have left is public comment, and I think we have a.
Can I add something before we get public comment? So I'm just thinking like timing, and I want to see if we have kind of consensus. So it's April now. If we set May, June, July, August to get an RFP out and do the listing tour around the community, that's 4 months. And that would give us, say, September, October, November, December for us and the board to do our work. So that by January of next year, we're ready to issue, and we can then incorporate into the budget cycle for 2023, 2024. Is that the timing everybody's thinking about?
That works.
Close.
4 months, and then into the budget cycle?
Hopefully, it only takes 4 months for the community.
Yeah, oh, I think it will. I mean,
Well, I think the community is, it's not just the providers and the families, but it's the rural, it's the other
That's what I'm
municipalities.
saying.
and its population.
Oh, you think it could perform?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't,
Good,
think- I think
because-
it could, but the other piece is the special population.
Special
We haven't talked about special needs, and I think that's, we haven't really delved into that. There's a lot of ways you can slice and dice who you listen to and in different groups, and that's why we need somebody who's done this kind of work.
So I could envision us meeting maybe monthly for the next 4 months, but then in that last quarter, then we meet. I mean, I'd rather meet frequently and get it done than
Right.
drag our.
Yes, yeah.
Once we've gathered all.
And then making sure that the meetings for this committee are scheduled such that if there's something that needs board approval, it can come pretty quickly to the next. And since we're meeting twice a month now, it's pretty easy to get something on that agenda, since the update will be on the agenda as a standing item. If there's something specific that needs approval, it can come before that.
And when will the audio, video that we budgeted will be in this bill?
So a lot of it is on backlog. And so Ashley and I talked about meeting with the company that we're working with to get everything rated, to see if we have enough just to increase or improve our audio.
Yeah.
So the mics.
It's the mics.
It's the mics, yeah, like mics from the roof hanging down would be helpful. So are we thinking in the next 4 or 5 months, or are we thinking next year? Or do you know?
I can look and see. I think we need to meet to see if we can make it happen in the next 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
It's not on the list.
Right.
But we
It's
can
not,
meet.
okay, I'm just curious.
You know,
Like, you have trouble hearing.
I have
It was
hope.
terrible. The Zoom needs to drop.
And I don't know, against every venue we've tried, I think the only place we've not had complaints about was the county commission
Yeah.
chamber. Every other venue has had problems with audio. And it's weird because the last meeting here, the data committee, there were several people who said they could not hear. I was on Zoom at home and heard every word. It was,
We can use the county chamber. I'm just gonna ask.
And I do have an email from Mark who said, hey, let's meet to talk about your audio, because I think he had some suggestions that might help.
yeah, and Mark is really good at that stuff. So I would encourage us to do that because
I'll talk to you.
First thing you do is eliminate Zoom. I mean,
I brought that up. Did you hear? I brought that
You couldn't
up.
hear.
I thought I heard something, but I didn't.
I brought up the idea that if we want to continue to do, it should be listen only, but we need to be having in-person meetings.
But what I also heard, because if you're Zooming, there was a problem that if you were on YouTube, that you could hear everything. And since the advantage of the Zoom is that you can participate. So if we're not allowing participation, then we should go to YouTube.
I think that might be the thing.
I'm perfect.
Well, we will have a quorum, but let's make sure that gets on the agenda for the meeting on the 25th.
YouTube listen only.
Yeah, I think that may be the solution, is YouTube listen only, and then if we want to be able to comment, we have to come in.
Yeah, or send us an email.
Or send us an email, I mean,
Send
yeah,
us information.
Or listen to, we broadcast the stuff, the meetings via the internet, when necessarily YouTube.
Yeah, great gracious.
Yeah, so can we do it that way?
Yeah, online
As opposed
meetings.
to, yeah.
Yeah, once I think they have everything. Well, at the county. we do it. Yeah,
and so it may be the county for now, if we can figure out the dates, because it is, I mean, it's frustrating for people who want to try, and like I said, it just seems very
The
barren.
school board has the same system as the county, it's just we are using Zoom. And I think that's.
Well, and it got better at the school board toward the end. I don't know what changed, but I could hear better at the end. I don't know. I couldn't hear anything in the beginning, but I
It
could.
was just terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, and you should have seen all the stuff in the chat.
Oh, it was horrible.
I mean,
In terms of
Very
the
frustrating.
we
audio,
hurt ourselves by offering it to,
Yeah, it
by
was very
being
frustrating.
accommodated, because they were, I'm tired of CTAC and blah, blah, blah. You know,
Yeah. well,
we're trying to pull one fast over, so, I did try to explain that no action was being taken because there weren't enough members to.
Are we gonna cover the issues if getting rid of Zoom with Dr. Hart needing to participate remotely? Is she then just listening to,
Yeah.
count that as attendance?
Yeah, no, the only way your attendance can count, if we have to have a physical forum, then we have a physical forum. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the way the statute reads is if there's an extenuating circumstance, then it's a meeting by meeting situation, or that's not, that would be if she were in the hospital.
That's a choice.
Yeah, we need to set something up.
Yeah, because I attended with COVID one time and I wasn't allowed to do it. I had COVID at that point, so. Yeah, that was-
Tina had COVID last year, that's why, so that's why.
Yeah.
We're there.
Well,
It's okay.
so we ready for public comment?
Third time's.
I think so. Ready for public comment?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
sorry, I just want
Do
to get
we
the time.
do we have any public comment?
We do have a social and most on the issues, yeah.
Yep.
Ms. Sunshine, you're recognized for 3 to 5 minutes. We'll be generous today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to just say first how much I appreciate the work that you're doing. I know that the trust is getting a lot of heat right now. Things take time to develop. We're only a couple years into having our trust, and there's been some really big hiccups that you guys have already talked about. And I'm just the strategic planning committee is a really great way to start to rectify some of those and to really get to understand the needs of the community. My hope for that process is that it not only builds knowledge for a period of time, but that the research itself will cultivate knowledge within the community and within the trust. I think that creating a position within the trust rather than an outside consultant to do the work will be really important, because there'll be a million tiny little decisions that have to be made about how what is learned is implemented, and having that same continuity, having the same person that has hands in all of that will be really helpful. A position for a community engagement researcher seems appropriate because of the ongoing nature of the work that we're trying to do. I appreciate the simple questions about what we need to do when we're thinking about funding, and what's the evidence base is a really important question. So I'm a special educator. I have a private consulting practice. I'm also the mother of a child with disability, and I've worked with children and families with disabilities in our community for 20 years. One part of the work that I do is to help families get to the resources that they need, to kind of find the resources and help them get there. And it's so hard. And as much as I know, even struggling with my own child, I'm like, I can't find the resources that we need. He has autism and some mental health difficulties. And so really finding out what the very specific types of resources are that people need and how we can connect them to them is very important. And we have a fractured system here in our community right now, where we have a lot of good stuff, not enough. And even just finding the ways to send people on the right pathways to get help is a real challenge. Beyond that, another challenge is that there's evidence-based practices that we know work and we don't have them available in our community. For example, floor time as a methodology for working with children with autism and other behavioral difficulties, using social thinking as a way of treating autism. My practice, my background is in learning disabilities, and I cannot find tutors to refer my clients to if I don't have enough room or to hire in. And so the 2 tutors that I have working under me, I meet with virtually, because we need to build our capacity within our community to build the deep knowledge that we need to do intervention. And so I know literacy, reading by third, you had mentioned is a top priority, but in order to make that happen, we really need to develop our knowledge of literacy and reading and mathematics and writing within the community, and to develop a team of core practitioners that can work with different agencies. And I don't know if that's something that the trust does or doesn't do, but really finding out where those gaps are for evidence-based practices is a key part of what the trust needs to do. And my concern is that if we just pass those, if we have one community listening person who runs a consultant who works on that, they're not going to be able to follow that entire thread into implementation and ensuring that we have evidence-based practices embedded in all aspects of the trust. The other, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I need to plug in my computer. I apologize.
That's okay. While you plug in, just to let you know, the trust has a coordinator for community engagement. It's a funded position that is currently filled, and she will be a member of this committee. So that continuity that you're talking about is something that you're spot on, and I think that person will be the ongoing listening after this and the ongoing making sure that we're accountable to what we heard.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Lombarda. And that position is so exciting to me whenever it first posted, as well as the research and evaluation person. I envision a position within the trust that's a connection between those two and a bridge between those two. And so a community engagement person definitely is very important in understanding and being able to help with some of the larger community engagement. But we also need to develop our knowledge base. And something that Dr. Karen Cole-Smith had talked about is if we have 4 funding priorities, we need to have experts in each of those fields within the trust so that we really have a deep knowledge. We need, as a trust, I say as because you're our community, the trust needs to develop its deep knowledge around the needs and the evidence-based practices that are necessary in order to address the systemic issues that we have. And so we have to have people at all levels. And that's something that I see really missing. And I think it's part of why we've struggled as a trust along the way, is because some of what's being asked, and even when RFPs come out, they're not necessarily capturing that level of knowledge. So the one last thing that I wanted to mention was about participation. And I appreciate, Commissioner Pinkinson, what you said about trying to navigate between Zoom so that I can follow a thread and participate, and then YouTube to be able to hear better. I know that there was some, thoughts that maybe we have people come in person if they want to be able to participate. And I think that makes a lot of sense. However, I think that it would be very limiting, especially during the current times that we're in. I know for me, I have a son with a disability and I work in a private practice. Like being able to participate via Zoom is very important. And I think that I heard you correctly, that was one of the ideas. There is an issue, and I know you guys are planning to, kind of looking at longer term solutions for it, but having that community participation is just so important within every meeting. So I so appreciate your time. I see the work that you're doing and the thoughtfulness that you're putting into it. And thank you.
Thank you so much for the comments.
Yeah.
Anybody else? All right, any board member comments?
I mean, the thing that really resonated with me is we really do need more navigators around in our community as a whole. I don't know if that's trust or county or what it is, but people to help navigate and connect.
I think navigate, connecting us with other potential funding entities, which we didn't talk a lot about, but I think that's the other thing the trust can do, and strategically how that fits in is, as a convener, can we make sure that the whole community is making best use of our resources? And Ken, you had talked way back about, the county is going to prioritize these things because the trust can take over some of the child things. And how do we, all of the entities that fund stuff, you guys fund stuff, how do we all work together to decide what the goal is and what each of us can do?
We need to be much more collective.
I think so.
County's good at public health, county's good at safety. Those are areas that I think about with our 4 priorities. County should pick up.
And what do the cities want to bring to the table?
Well, we've just had this thing with the small municipalities wanting to do this opioid task force, and we were able to facilitate that. So I think that there's lots of those opportunities that we ought to also be considering as part of answering those 4 questions. Is that the best use of our money, or is there a way to pool money or bring other money in?
And we have United Way of Care Focus as well. So we
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of things that are possibilities. I do think the idea of making sure that we have positions within the trust that can address some of those things. I mean, my only fear with that is, as a small trust, then you start to get overhead. Where's the balance between administrative costs and operating costs? The more positions you're adding, now you're adding infrastructure costs. That's going to take away from programmatic services. And I am a believer that the whole notion that nonprofits and these kinds of entities should have 5%. Nobody can run on that.
Well, unless you're really, really big.
Yeah, if you're really, really big, I mean, I watched that happen at Meridian where our admin rate went down, not because we had just so much program money that didn't require new high-level people, it just required direct staff. So I think we just need to be mindful of that balance, but I don't disagree that there are some funds, and I think, and maybe one of the things that's missing is understanding how you guys do collaborate as a team. You do work very much as a team, and I think I think Dr. Moss has pointed out that this listening tour can also be an educational opportunity if we use it correctly.
And we were mindful when we were hiring staff to, so for an example, because I understand what she's saying, where we have our 4 goals and then having individuals that focus on those. Well, we were mindful when we did that, when we hired Dion, he had all of the experience and education. We're working with school-age children, and then Neil's position is dedicated solely to that health because of the 0 to 5, expanding it to 0 to 8, which also crosses over into education. So
We need to have that on our website as part of people's bios and so people understand what it is that we've got at the table already. That's a great point.
Show on a functional, operational standpoint, we need to figure out how we can get public participation in a non-Zoom way. Because it seems like Zoom is probably where the pitfall is.
Does the public have access to Teams? We use Teams at our agency, and it holds up really well.
We had a call, in the county, there was a call in, you call in. And,
Well, that's what I was like,
Outrageously expensive.
well, I have a Teams link that is mine that has a phone component to it, and I don't know if there's.
Yeah, I mean, I've had
I
as much
just don't
trouble
think
with
it's set up
Teams.
for them. I think public participation, and you can kind of do that.
well, you heard, because our meetings are at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
mean, Zoom and Teams is set up for like internal communication and groups where everybody has their own dedicated computer, and it's
Right.
for that. It's really.
It's very difficult to use it this way. I mean,
not
I
their problem.
have both
that's what I
Teams
say,
and
take that
Zoom
away.
because I do enough consulting with people who have one or the other.
Right,
And
same.
it's a 6 at 1, half a dozen, which one I get clear audio on any given day.
I would like to be able to speak to Mark and find out a little bit more about what the options are. If there is a line that we can use for participation, if folks can't physically be here, maybe they can call in.
Yeah, the county has moved to in-house, and you can watch, but it's not, there's no call.
So you can't call in with any kind of opinion. You have to be there to give an opinion.
Well, the call-ins when you could hear best. You know,
Well, but yeah, right.
I mean, you could hear that. I mean, it was crystal clear.
Right.
You know, it was
It's
the,
us that
everybody on the panel, that it was just
People in person. you
a
can-
total waste of time almost.
that was
Yeah, something between the microphone setup and Zoom doesn't, maybe worth a call to Zoom to see whether there's a,
Well, Mark will have that because he's staying close to.
yeah, that's right, Mark was staying close to that, so maybe he said, I think the last I had heard is that he was looking, I'm just reading your guys' stuff, is that he was,
Now, the school board uses YouTube, and they have a separate system, but it's very personnel. It requires, I think, 3 people.
Mhm.
Well,
and can they comment through YouTube?
So
I
they call
didn't
in,
think
people call in.
About a call number.
well, it could be, we just say, you need to be there, or maybe you can get a phone number and then text a question. Or something relatively simple.
Well, there are free conference lines that if we projected everything through YouTube, then they use the conference line to just call in.
But the problem is how to do a queue. How do you manage a queue? That's what gets it to
That's
be
the
expensive
problem.
is if you've got 5 people wanting to comment on a single item.
You would just have to open it up and they
I
take
think
turns.
it's
Well,
called Mark.
I think if you want to talk on a particular item, you need to be there. But if you have just kind of a general question,
But still, you have 10 people in front of the meeting. How do you manage a queue on a conference line? You really
and that was
can't.
another problem, is it was hard to just hear what you said about, the initial comment, and that was creating all kinds of problems on the chat.
Right.
It's just, and it wasn't anything you did. It
I was just reading these things
No good
scripted.
deed
It was-
goes unpunished.
It was just,
Yeah.
it just wasn't very audible.
Right.
So-
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
It was just very muffled in the beginning. Like I said, I could hear her toward the end on my.
And I know we all had our little mics on because I could see the little red, light on the mic. It's
You
just,
never, but when you turn your head at all, you know, even when you're talking directly, it wasn't very good, but if you turn your head,
On.
and it was garbage. It's,
yeah,
Take it
it's
personally.
really, no, I'm not. It's just frustrating because we've tried Cade, we've tried school board, we've tried here, and it just, there's no place that seems. So I think it is Zoom. It's the Zoom option. And so,
Well, the way the county made the Zoom option work is every person on the dais had their computer open to Zoom.
you were all on
oh, so
Zoom.
you were using that.
And so you could, no, we weren't using that mic, but that allowed for whoever was speaking to be, people knew, okay,
Yeah.
that Ken is now speaking, now Lee is speaking. So on the dais, the audio was going through the system, but the
Yes, and
visual
it's
was
the, but
going
it's
through
the audio
show.
that's been the problem.
Nowhere comes.
Even when we went back to class, we had every computer opened up and we joined the Zoom meeting, we muted our computer. and then we
Right,
went
but it's
through-
the audio that seems to be the big problem.
Right, because people can see what's going on, they just can't hear.
So have it all figured out by the time. we get-
Your marching orders.
In addition to everything else we're juggling right now, just fix the audio. It is, and all we can do is say, I wish, come to the meeting, I wish we were masters of the technology, we're not.
It's not working.
Or it just may not be the technology is not available.
Yeah, at a price we can afford.
So how soon do we need to meet again? There's some work that.
Well, I think the next step is Catherine needs to get us a proposal that we take to the board. Our next meeting, Catherine, no pressure, is the 25th.
I think from an urgency standpoint, I think getting the scope together for the community listening process is also very, very high priority, because I think that's going to take a while to get that done and out the door.
Yeah, so if you can get us something, and then maybe
Yes.
by the first meeting in May, we have the scope started so that we can bring that to the board at the first meeting in May, which I believe is the 8th, 9th. Well, it was only our birthday.
Okay, anything else?
I don't, so sure, I don't think we need to meet until after we do that.
Yeah, right.
And
So
then
we'll
May,
just,
June.
we'll set up,
Because you can meet with Christy to work on that scope. and I'll bring that down.
okay. All right, then with that, we're gonna adjourn.
Thank you all, thank you.